Royalty. Royalty.
Please try. Maybe you get 99999. Ooh, perfect for the lie.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, and we're going to compare them to Yah's word and the internet or social media and other voices that we hear on this journey. One of the very interesting things about that particular scene, and we won't get into the scene as much if you want to go through and read what it says, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, is that there were two voices. Obviously, it was Yah's voice through his word, of course, what he commanded, and then the adversary's word. Now, one of the things that people miss, because they're contrasting these two powers, I guess, Yah being the greater power, Hasatan being the lesser power, but all the while yet a power, is the fact that he doesn't lie in a far off way. The lies are very, very close, and the lie is very, very close to the truth, and it's the ability to get you to see something in a way that you haven't seen it before, but it also being untrue at the same time. And so in order to do that, I know a lot of people put down the intellect of the adversary, and not to give him any praise, but the adversary is a being of light, which means an enlightened being with knowledge. He witnessed creation, so he understands how the elements of creation works, and he's been using the same tactics against humanity, which means he understands how humanity works. And a lot of those are internal. They're based upon our own internal thoughts and feelings and understandings about things, and our own internal idols also, the things that we set up in our heart and the things that we want to do and the things that we want to experience. A lot of our adversary is internal. And so with that being said, scripture says, and I'll put the verse in here, that we often as humans, and obviously because our hearts are inclined toward wickedness until we're renewed by Yah's word, we follow our itching ears. And I see a lot of people partaking of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or aka the internet, in the capacity of, you search out what you want to find. If you've ever tried to share with somebody about your particular walk or what you're doing or your understanding of scriptures, as a person trying to live out the cultural aspects of the Hebrew Israelite lifestyle, you'll find that if you show a Christian, they will only come back to you with Christian information and how their particular doctrine combats what you said to be true, and not necessarily scriptural evidence for it. So what they're doing is they go online and they type in, what is Jesus's real name? And they click on the first Christian link, or they say, can I eat pork, or should I eat pork, or is pork against the Bible? And they click on a Christian article, and they read through, and they're reading through a lens of somebody who carries the same perspective as them. So the same thing is true with people in the Hebrew lifestyle, or trying to live the Hebrew lifestyle. And what people are doing, and what I mean by the Hebrew lifestyle, is a crossed over lifestyle in order to follow Yah's law, statutes, and commandments. I don't like using the term religion. I don't like putting terms on a cultural and a national heritage that is not based on man-made religious terms or religious boxes. It's not that. So I'll remove that. And what you get with a lot of those people is they'll find or seek out teachers that sound good based upon what they want to hear. So it's the same type of cognitive dissonance, where you're not going directly to the word, but you're actually taking something else and filtering it through what you feel should be right. And it's not always to make something easier. Sometimes people make stuff a lot harder for themselves, or sometimes people negate to do things because of their teachers or the doctrines. You are not the filter. The word is the filter. So whenever anything is presented to a person, we don't go, oh, that person pulled out this verse and they showed me a couple of Hebrew words, and so that makes sense to me. But if you have not read the whole Bible, you have zero discernment, because you don't have enough of a foundation to determine whether or not something is scripturally consistent. And what I mean by scripturally consistent, I mean that you can look in the beginning and follow that trend all the way throughout Scripture. If it's not scripturally consistent, it's not true, because Yah does not change, and anybody in this lifestyle understands that. That's, I mean, very foundational for even, or fundamental for even following and going on this journey. So if a person comes with a truth and you don't have the necessary tools, meaning a scriptural knowledge, at least have read the whole thing to determine whether or not something is true, then it would be really, it would behoove that person to not just say, I'm going to follow that particular doctrine. For instance, I know a lot of people who reject the New Testament, not because they've read it, but because somebody's pointed out all the places in the New Testament where there's fallacy. Now, to each his own, but a person who has read the New Testament can come away with two things. If I don't necessarily believe that that whole account is exactly true, I have enough of a scriptural knowledge to understand that all of those concepts find themselves in Torah. So whether or not you believe in an actual literal Messiah, who came and literally was an atonement or a sacrificial lamb for the remission of sin, not to pay for anyone's sin. Every man dies for his own sins. The wages of sin is death. So if he came to pay for sin, obviously nobody would die. It's totally different for the curses that come with sin, and to be able to be in right fellowship with the Father, of course. If anybody can't see, though, the spiritual side of being Christ-like, or being Messiah-like, or being like a HaMashiach, and not understanding that there were lots of HaMashiachs in the Old Testament, that person has not read enough scripture. Do you kind of understand what I'm saying? So the idea of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is to go to a particular source in order to, with the slanted ideal, right? So obviously in the story of Chua, or Eve, as many might know her, she goes to this tree and is talking to the serpent, and what he does is he points out something particular about what she understands about this tree. And Yah said, if you eat of it, the day you eat of it, you will surely die. And the serpent goes, you won't surely die. Well, in that conversation, he uses a different word. He flips Yah's word and uses a different word. He's like, you'll die. I mean, not like that. You're not going to die like you think death. So maybe you didn't get a proper understanding of it. And that's how people come at individuals with this, with truth, or with what they perceive or tell people is truth. They come to people and they say, oh, you probably believe X, Y, and Z, but what if I showed you this? And so on this walk, it's very, very imperative that we focus on learning Yah's word in order to understand what Scripture says, instead of seeking out somebody to tell us. A lot of people are intellectually lazy. I don't know if you understand what that means, but it means that instead of going and doing the footwork for yourself, you find somebody who may be very knowledgeable about their particular topic and may actually know the truth, but you lean on that person. That is an issue of our people. We always want to lean on other people for understanding of Yah's word instead of reading it for ourselves. Now, once you've read scripture, there's nothing wrong with finding somebody who is like-minded and is in Torah and is doing the best that they can to open up the word, but nobody's perfect. So if you don't know scripture, a person can make a mistake. You can follow that person, and that person can come back in a year or 6 months or 2 years later and say, you know what? I was off in this one area. But then you had a whole bunch of people who didn't really fact check or encourage or help also the teacher to grow. Because if you're not reading, and I'm the only person reading, and I'm the only person studying, then you're left with with dealing with my level of maturity in scripture. But if everybody has a shovel and everyone is digging and everyone understands, then we can all come together and tackle whatever task we are trying to come to a conclusion. Because there's a lot of information out here that's one-sided. Like, I mean, I'm not big on combating doctrine, but once I see holes in it that don't make any sense, then I can't deal with it. because a person is sold out to something where you came to a conclusion that was a partial conclusion. And a lot of these offshoot doctrines and offshoot camps and offshoot ideologies come from a unbalanced understanding of Scripture. So while you're on this walk, the idea is you're constantly being challenged to compare Yah's word to what you're hearing. If ever you stop taking whatever a person says back to the Scripture, and I'm not talking just that one verse that they said, but run that thing all the way through. Whenever you stop doing that, you end up in the situation of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because there is some good in what people are talking about, but there's also bad in it too, if it's a tainted word. And so to just say, okay, well, that was good and it sat well with me, I don't have to run this back through Scripture, can leave you with planting weed seeds in good soil. And it's happening to a lot of people with a lot of silly doctrines. And I'm not really going to get into them because there's so many that can be solved so easily if you would just study and if you would stop being intellectually lazy. And maybe in a later time we'll bring out some of those things, but it's just not that hard to look at something. And when you're dealing with the idea of your soul, of that thing that's not destroyable, and entrusting it to somebody who is human and who can err, it gets really, really tricky. So the issue that Chihuahua was faced with, and the issue that we're faced with, is trying everything according to the word. So men, you try everything your wife brings you with the word. That would have been the natural progression of that situation, because remember, when she partook, nothing immediately happened to the man, because he is supposed to be her buffer and her corrector. So for me, I have a husband. When I study or think about something, and sometimes it's like, whoa, I haven't heard that before. Okay, so we're in it. Before I mention it to anybody, we're reading it, we're studying it, we're pulling out the Hebrew, we're breaking it down, we're finding verses that connect or verses that don't connect, and we go back and forth and we spar. Like, really, and because there's a healthy balance between the masculinity and femininity in my home, where if I bring something, yes, he has the final say, because if we are inconclusive about something that I've studied, then guess what? I don't bring it up, because we have not come to a particular point where this thing can then be presented and not have gone through the person that is supposed to be next under Yah and his authority. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to study, I'm going to chew on it, I'm going to put it together and compile it, I'm going to present it to him. If he goes over it, looks at it, wow, that's great. I didn't even think about it that way. Yeah, you make that video. That's awesome, right? Now, there are times where he's like, I don't know, that doesn't necessarily jive with what I personally believe. And I go, well, sometimes what you personally believe might be in your personal box. Let's go through it and see if I'm right or wrong. And we'll go through it, and he goes through it, and we go back and forth. And no harm, no foul. If it's something where it's like, I get what you're saying, but maybe you should find another way to say it, then we're good, right? There has to be a healthy balance, and that's the whole purpose. Now, for women who are unmarried, of course, Yah is that balance, and the Ruach is that balance. You cannot lean to your own spirit, and I think that's the idea of being uncovered and presenting the word, because a person who gets by themselves, or who is by themselves, and is only going through themselves and not using the community around them to buffer their thoughts, can come up with a lot of obscure, abstract things that don't necessarily fit into a greater scheme. So as we tackle this idea of walking on this journey and dealing with the internet and people's voices, we have to be careful to listen for Yah's voice. And that is done through reading and studying and understanding the word. So when you're partaking from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, you really need to be careful. Because now that we're in this world of duality, where there is a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and there is a tendency to deviate from truth, then people need to always go back to the word. I know a lot of people are into the physical side of the word, and understanding those things, those elements that are mystified, like stones and our health and our bodies and this and that. And remember though that when you're looking for things in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and in books and in people, that you have to buffer it. Torah is not set up to keep you from not seeing things, because remember, the serpent came to Chawah and spoke to her and told her, you're not to eat of the tree. And she said, oh no, we're not to eat of it or touch it, right? That was not Yah's commandment. The idea of, there's a difference between seeing if something is true and lining it up against Yah's word and making it a part of your life and who you are. Because you're going to be presented with information that you're going to have to filter. But you don't filter those things by ingesting them and doing them and then later finding out that they're wrong. The idea of Torah is an anchor or a guideline. Truth is the idea of something that's firm and steadfast. And it repeats and it prevails over other things. So if you find something and you go, wow, that makes sense, and I could feel that and that energy feels good to me, take it to the word. Because the whole idea of Torah is to keep things in its proper perspective. You want to make sure that you're not, dabbling in false doctrine or witchcraft or any of these things. So you take those truths and then you compare them to the word and see what Yah says about him and in what capacity that those things can function and what capacity they can't function. Because the idea of Torah is to keep us anchored in truth as we go and explore our physical universe. The reason why we don't get a lot of detailed information about things is because it takes the exploration out of things. But when we're exploring and trying to understand truth and dealing in this world of duality that has a lot of knowledge of good and evil, we have to remember that we eat from the tree of life. And when we're presented with information from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we have to take those back to the Father and see where those fit in to his plan and his scheme for the universe. Now, some of that stuff might not vibe with other people and they might not understand, but it's not your particular job to get somebody where you are. Okay? So just be really careful, because Satan is not lying to you blatantly. He's not presenting flat out untruth. It's truth. It's a lie with truth mingled in, which makes it very, very dangerous. A drop of poison will kill you. The whole thing can look good. You can drink it. You can't taste it. And then you'll find out, when they do they'll find out when they do your autopsy that there was poison in whatever you had and it was undetectable by you. So be very, very careful, because it's all about choices. We're on a path and we're making choices in order to follow Yah more consistently, and to follow him and to listen for his voice and to hear his voice over all other voices. If we stay on that path and listen to his voice, we cannot be affected. We won't be affected by the perils of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because by staying on his path, he can continually protect us from those things. And by staying close to him, we can run all of the things that don't make sense or present themselves in a contrary manner through him and through his word, and get proper understanding.
Royalty.